there's so many ways to break this thing down, and we're not going to spend the next 20 minutes on it, but it's, a lot of folks, especially former players, a lot of times like to say best player, best team. Real simple. That's all there is to it. Like when Chris Paul got a little bit of love a couple of years ago, there was people saying, oh, he should be the MVP. Suns best record, best team. I'm not typically a believer in that. It's a lot more nuanced. Giannis is a tricky one because I'm looking for separators. And there's, to me, I do find myself after voting for Jokic the past couple of years, maybe this is a flawed line of thinking, I'm ready to like make sure we acknowledge the defensive side of the floor again. And Jokic is a capable defender, but these guys are elite. And that obviously means that Giannis and Joel get, hat tips in that regard. But Giannis is best player, best team, and, doing historical things from a production standpoint. Even anecdotally, you talk to his teammates, you talk to their coaches, and you talk about value. He checks all those boxes. We have an anonymous player poll, Howard, that's coming out, and I'm sneak previewing a little bit of that. One of the questions is to NBA players, if you could start a roster from scratch right now, who are you picking? I don't know the final tally, but in my conversations with players, it's like, man, I keep running into a lot of Giannis. And for MVP, there's some part of me that's like, man, we've seen him do it on the final stage. We know who he is. He's become a modern day, great. I mean, I don't want to put him in the same thing as that Wilt, but like he's doing Wilt type things and, Russell type things. And, I don't, long rambling way of saying, I don't know where I'm going to land, but man, these guys have been great.
It's a true three-way race. And again, I will emphasize this part of it. I want to accentuate the positive here. It's a true three-person race. They are all worthy. There's no wrong answer here. And we don't have that happen every year. There are years where we've had unanimous MVPs. We've had a near unanimous MVP a couple of times. LeBron was 1 vote short one year. Shaq was 1 vote short once. Steph has, of course, won unanimously. We've had years where it was very, very clear, and it was a race for second and third. I think this is a true three-person race. I know some people will disagree and they'll say, you're crazy. It's absolutely Giannis. You're crazy. It's absolutely, it's more like the Embiid and Jokic camps. The Giannis camp has been kind of mellow. I think to their credit, they're not thumping everybody over the head.
Okay. So I'm going to jump in super fast. You just surprised me because to me, it's the Jokic camp. This is the only one that has been coming my way on. You're crazy. It's not even a conversation.
No, come on. The Embiid camp has been just as off the rails.
That's
I mean,
true.
starting with our friend Daryl Morey. Sorry, Daryl. This is at least the second time in the last week I've been on a podcast.
Let it go. Call everybody out. Drew Hanlon. I respect it. Drew's got a lot of respect. Yeah. Drew drives me nuts. But that's the thing.
So the advocacy on behalf of Embiid or Jokic, not so much with Giannis, the advocacy on behalf of those guys has gotten a little too much, right? We've all seen it over the course of the last several weeks. We don't need to revisit all of that. But what I would say to them, to the general audience, to NBA fans, this is a true three-man race. They all have incredible cases to be made. And what the job for you and I is, Sam, in these last days of trying to figure out what our actual ballots will look like as voters is there a separator? You said it yourself. You used that word, I think, separator. And that's what we end up doing in close races. Okay, what differentiates? And you can differentiate in any number of directions, right? Jokic is by far the most efficient scorer. And when you start classifying his stats based on certain measures within Basketball Reference's stat head tool, Jokic is like historically great offensively, right? And if you start looking at all the advanced stats, there are people who are very, very big on the all-in-one stats, which they don't understand. They just know they're advanced stats, so therefore they must be infallible. They're not. He leads in all the advanced stats. He must be MVP. Okay, but those stats don't account for a lot of things. They do have their biases baked in, and it doesn't account for defense. And clearly the other two guys are better defensively. All right, but we don't have defensive metrics that are that accurate, at least not in the public sphere. So how do what can we say in Embiid or Giannis's case in their favor as a defensive metric, since we have such poor defensive metrics publicly, to offset how much more efficient Jokic is, right? So this is where I end up in these circular arguments, even with myself. It's you're trying to parse out, you're trying to differentiate. And then sometimes guys just eliminate themselves on games played. And at one point, Giannis was pretty far behind the other guys, but he's only 2 games behind Embiid in games played now. And because Jokic has been missing a bunch of games lately, Embiid's only 3 games behind Jokic now. So games played is
Do
not
you
going to
have
be
the
the
tally in
separator. And
front
we
of you?
will,
Not to put you on the
yeah,
spot.
it's Giannis has played 62, Embiid 64, Jokic 67. That is not enough of a spread to me to be
Yeah,
definitive.
yeah, yeah.
Um, but
Well,
listen,
because
I
for
mean,
me, I don't know about you,
Jokic 5 more games.
Jokic's availability the last couple of years was absolutely a factor for me. And to your
Of course
point,
it was.
yeah, and
Yes.
to your point,
I
he's losing that card.
I should note, last year I voted for Giannis. So the first year Jokic won, I voted for Jokic. Last year I voted for Giannis. That was based in large part on Jokic being on a team that didn't matter. A very simple thing here. You talked about the rubric of, best player and best team. I don't believe in that, but I do think it's almost like a platonic ideal. Like if we could give MVP to best player and best team every year, that's kind of what you're looking for. The MVP should be a really, really great player on a really great team, where the player and the team are both having a great season, right? Like I think everybody would agree on that general description of what the MVP is and has been in this league for most of its existence. So that's what you're looking for, but it doesn't always work out cleanly that way. And so it becomes this sliding scale.
Right.
But Jokic, his team just didn't win enough games last year, as far as I'm concerned. I'm a big believer in the 50 plus wins. I'm a big believer that your team has to matter. Like the MVP does not come from like, oh, this player had an outstanding season on a team that finished 8th. You have to be on a team that mattered. And I will always stick with that. And this year, Jokic's team does matter. They're leading the Western Conference. So I can't eliminate him on the thing I eliminated him on or downgraded him on last year. I can't eliminate or downgrade Embiid based on the games played measure that has hurt him in past years, because he's only 3 games shy of Jokic right now. And all 3 of these guys have been outstanding. All 3 of their teams are plausible contenders. So for me, it's a true conundrum. I don't know where I'll land when we file these ballots on April 10th.
Yeah, I don't either. I mean, to your point about Denver, yes, number 1 seed in the West is that checks that box. But I'm always a sucker for looking at the scope of the league as well, and so they are 1 game ahead of the Sixers, and 5. Is it 5? 6 behind. No, I'm sorry, 4 behind the Bucks.